They rerouted their stormwater straight onto my land. They didn't ask, didn't warn me, didn't even pretend to hide it. They just stuck a pipe through a retaining wall and acted like gravity was the polite thing to do. I found it in a field full of mud and cigarette butts and an oily sheening that made the grass look like it had been painted with bad intentions, and in that moment I knew one of us was about to learn an expensive lesson. My name's Caleb. I live just outside a little town in western Kentucky, the kind of place where people still lift a hand when they pass you on a two-lane road. I bought this place 15 years ago for the quiet a red barn that needed work, a couple of acres room for horses. I saved up after years in construction and used an inheritance to buy something solid. The low pasture has always been the wettest part of the place, sure, but it drained. Storms here come hard in spring, tin roofs drummed on all night, and by the next afternoon the ground would be firm again. Walt, next door, pushing 70 and still chewing toothpicks, used to say that land was smarter than most people. It knew how to drink and when to let go. So when that week of rain rolled through last April, I wasn't worried at first, just another soak, nothing my pasture hadn't seen. On the 6th morning, I walked down to the fence and my boots sank deeper than they should have. Not just soft ground, actual standing water up to my ankles, mud swirling with wrappers, and a slick that gleamed like oil. The horses' favorite grazing spots lay flattened and yellowing, and the water pressed toward the barn close enough to picture ruined hay. The back edge of my property runs along a tall retaining wall that belongs to the subdivision up on the ridge, Briar Ridge Estates, brick entrance, iron gate that never closes, a sign about architectural standards. People up there keep their distance neat. Halfway down that wall, I saw a clean circle of concrete cutting through the stone. Fresh, sharp-edged. It looked like somebody had shoved a pipe through and snapped it off right at my side of the fence. I crouched and took pictures. The end of the pipe was a full foot out, 12 inches across new, and it had been working overtime, judging by the debris caked around its lip. I followed that line of thought up the hill. They'd scraped the ridge raw when the second phase of the subdivision went in. There'd been bulldozers and dump trucks in that pit where they kept all their runoff. They'd built a retention pond up there and apparently decided the easiest exit was to punch through my wall and let gravity finish the job. I called the property manager, Trent Holloway. He told me it was part of an updated drainage plan. My land sat lowest, so it was natural drainage. He said it met code and no easement was needed. That's when surprise curdled into cold. I went to the county office with photos and maps. Denise checked records and said I could file a complaint, but an inspector might take weeks. Weeks. My field was already a bathtub. Walt leaned on the fence and spat. "They do that without asking," he said. "That ain't right." The question was simple. Were we going to let it stand? I don't start fights for sport. I believe in lines, fences, deeds, respect. Cross them without permission, and there should be consequences. Trent's next call made it clear he thought this was a math problem. Dozens of homeowners with HOA dues versus one guy with a barn. "We're monitoring it," he said. "If there's verified loss, we'll reassess." "Define verified," I asked. "Does my soaked feed count, or do you need my foundation to crack?" So I read up on water law and found a plain principle. You don't have to accept someone concentrating runoff onto your land. You can take reasonable steps to protect what's yours. I liked the word reasonable. It meant I didn't have to wait for an emergency to prove the point. I hauled in heavy clay and Walt fired up his backhoe. We built an earthen berm 2 feet high along the wall, packed it tight, laid plastic liner where the pipe met the ground, and set cinder blocks in a snug half circle around the outlet. I didn't jam anything into their pipe. I stayed on my side of the fence and removed the low spot where the water had been spilling out. If water came, it would meet compacted clay and reinforced block and have nowhere to go but back up the line. For 2 days, nothing happened. Then the sky tightened and rain came in slow and steady, the kind that makes the porch board sing. From my porch, the pipe poured into my new barrier and the water pushed against it, and instead of splashing across my pasture, it pressed back. There's a strange calm when you know you acted within your rights, and the rest is just physics and choices. I wasn't dancing on the porch, I was listening. By morning, the retention pond up on the ridge had swelled beyond its neat edges. The walking trail around it was underwater, and sump pumps were running at several houses. Around 9, a black SUV skidded down the access road and Trent stomped up my driveway, hair-plastered shoes sinking into damp gravel, demanding what I'd done. I told him plainly I protected my property. He sputtered about engineered flow and basements and homeowners losing things. I pointed out the math: 3 homeowners with sump pumps versus 1 man with a barn and a couple of horses whose property did they think was cheaper to sacrifice. He couldn't meet that. Then the county inspector showed up. Denise had flagged my complaint. Greg measured the pipe, asked about permits. Trent stumbled, "We're finalizing paperwork." Greg shook his head. Operational infrastructure requires approved permits, especially when it redirects concentrated discharge onto neighboring land. That was the twist. Not a hidden ally from the start, but a procedural check that changed the whole fight. Within 48 hours, emergency pumps were running and contractors were rerouting water while the HOA scrambled for a fix. I didn't gloat. It was confirmation they'd gambled on my land as the cheapest place to put their problem, and the bet had come due. A week later, a man from one of the flooded homes knocked on my door. His kids' playroom had flooded. He wanted to know why I blocked the outlet. I told him they told me it was standard and natural drainage. They'd never asked. He sat on the porch and we talked like neighbors do when the script falls apart, and there was no neatness in that conversation, only honest fatigue. In the end, Briar Ridge spent close to $200,000 redesigning their drainage, installing underground loops, and reinforcing the pond. The concrete spout was removed, the wall sealed. My berm stayed as a quiet reminder. By midsummer, the pasture healed and the barn stayed dry through 2 late storms. I walked the fields differently after that. I used to believe most disputes were misunderstandings you could talk through. Sometimes they are. Sometimes people choose convenience over courtesy and assume you'll take the hit. What changed wasn't hatred. It was a quiet certainty that boundaries matter, because dignity matters. I didn't set out to be a vigilante. I wanted my barn to stay dry and my horses to eat in peace, but along the way I realized something deeper, that respect isn't a courtesy you hand out to people with better landscaping. Boundaries aren't just lines on paper. They're the way we tell each other what matters. When someone decides your ground is free storage for their problems, it's a small theft, and small thefts add up to a life where only the loudest wallets win. That realization stung, and it stayed with me long after the grass grew back. So here's the question. If someone rerouted their problem onto your land, would you quietly accept it because it's easier, or put your ground back where it belongs? Was I protecting what's mine, or did I go too far? Tell me below. I read every comment, and if you've wrestled with an HOA or a neighbor who treated your boundary like a suggestion, share this story.